Welcome to Instrument of Power.
Glad to be here for this.
So today, a single signature on a ceasefire in Lebanon just gave a Republican congressman in Washington the exact leverage he needed to defy the President of the United States.
Which is pretty incredible when you think about the distance there.
Right, exactly. I mean, to understand how a peace treaty 6,000 miles away alters the mechanics of the U.S. Constitution, we have to look completely past the partisan noise of, the 24-hour news cycle.
Yeah, we have to ignore all that entirely.
Exactly. We have a stack of 10 daily briefings from today, June 4th, 2026. And our goal for this deep dive is to bypass the outrage and just examine the raw underlying mechanics of American government.
Because we aren't here to cheer for a political team, right?
No, not at all. We are looking at the engine room. And to do that, we need a framework, a way to filter the noise into signal.
Right, we need a specific lens for you to look through.
So I want you to lay out the intellectual foundation for today's deep dive. Where are we actually starting this analysis?
Well, we are starting about 800 years ago, actually.
Wait, really? 800?
Yeah, I mean, to understand what is happening in Washington today, you really have to go back to the year 1215.
Okay, wow. Where are we in 1215?
We're in a meadow in England called Runnymede. That is where King John was forced by his barons to put his seal on a document called the Magna Carta.
Right, the Magna Carta. Everyone learns about that in, middle school.
Exactly. But what's crucial here is that moment is the inception of a radical mechanical shift in human governance.
How so? What actually changed mechanically?
Well, before that, power was divine and absolute, right? It lived entirely within the personality of the monarch.
So the king was the system.
Yes, exactly.
Mhm.
But the Magna Carta introduced the idea that the power of a ruler can actually be constrained by a written system of rules.
Specifically regarding things like taxation and due process, right?
Spot on. And if you fast forward to 1653, we see Oliver Cromwell's instrument of government.
Which was, that was the first sovereign, codified, written constitution in the English-speaking world, wasn't it?
It was. And it was basically a desperate attempt to create a system to manage power after a King Charles I had literally lost his head in the English Civil War.
Right, because they realized that just removing a tyrant wasn't enough.
Exactly. You had to build a machine to process power. So, a new tyrant wouldn't just step right in and take his place.
And all of that historical trial and error basically culminates in the U.S. Constitution of 1787.
Yes, that is the ultimate version of this machine.
Okay, let's unpack this, because when we say the U.S. Constitution, I think most people watching or listening think of a sacred, almost mythological document.
Oh, absolutely. They treat it like it's religious text.
Right, but you're talking about it as a piece of engineering.
Exactly. It is a schematic. I mean, the founders of the 1787 Constitution were totally obsessed with the architecture of power.
Because they knew human nature doesn't change, right?
Right. Leaders will always want more power. They will always push boundaries.
So rather than relying on leaders to just be virtuous, they designed a system of interlocking gears.
Yes, the executive, the legislative, and the judicial.
And here's the crucial part for you listening. Those gears are intentionally designed to grind against each other.
They're built to create massive friction.
And that 800-year lineage brings us to the core analytical question that will drive every single story we look at in this deep dive.
Which is the power we are seeing today being governed by a system? Or is it concentrated in a personality?
That is the perfect lens for what we are looking at today, because we have a fascinating roadmap ahead of us.
We really do.
We're going to look at clashes in the Senate where executive will is hitting a legislative wall. We're going to examine foreign policy ripples and how global treaties affect domestic power.
Which is a dynamic people often miss completely.
Exactly. Plus, we'll look at the limits of executive power when it comes to demographics and the deployment of physical force on the streets of D.C.
And we can't forget the press.
Right. We will explore the press acting as the unofficial, unwritten check on power. And finally, we'll look at how power, once it leaves office, attempts to permanently memorialize itself.
It's a packed stack of briefings.
It is. So let's dive right into the friction of the legislative machine.
The Senate floor is exactly where we should start testing our framework, I think.
Right. So looking at our briefings, the AIVA America Act has officially failed in the Senate.
It did. And we need to break down the mechanics of what this actually is.
Well, the Save America Act is a sweeping Republican election overhaul bill. It was designed to mandate strict federal standards for voter identification, right?
Yes, and it would fundamentally alter how voter rolls are maintained across all 50 states.
And what is crucial here for our framework is that President Trump had explicitly publicly labeled this piece of legislation as a top priority for his congressional allies.
Right, so this was the direct mandate from the executive personality. He wanted it done.
But it died. And at the same time, we have this really interesting piece of analysis from Jonah Goldberg.
The editor-in-chief of the Dispatch, yeah.
Right. And he's questioning whether the president's ongoing political controversies are actively interfering with his own legislative agenda.
So if we view this purely through the mechanics of power, we have to look at the fundamental design of the United States Senate.
Because it wasn't designed to be fast?
No, the Senate was not designed to be efficient at all.
Yeah.
It was designed intentionally to be a system of massive friction.
Like that George Washington quote, right? Where he described the Senate to Thomas Jefferson as the cooling saucer?
Yes, exactly. The saucer where the hot tea of legislative passion is poured to cool down. You have to remember how the Senate operates mechanically.
Because it's so different from the House.
Completely different. Unlike the House of Representatives, which operates on majority rule and represents raw population size, the Senate represents geography.
Right. It gives Wyoming the exact same mechanical weight as California.
Exactly. And it relies on the filibuster, meaning you don't just need 51 votes to pass something like the Save America Act.
You need 60 votes just to end the debate on it.
Right. So when you have a highly personality-driven executive, someone who operates on rapid directives, public pressure, immediate demands.
And that personality hits the slow, deliberate, geographically divided institutional gears of the Senate.
The result is immense friction. They just don't mesh.
Let me stop you there, though, because I want to challenge this idea.
Okay, go ahead.
Isn't this just a failure of vote whipping? Like, why are we elevating a failed bill to a grand clash of personality versus system?
That's a fair question.
I mean, if they had just negotiated better, it might have passed, right?
It's a fair pushback, but the reason it elevates to a systemic level is the actual nature of the pressure being applied.
What do you mean by the nature of the pressure?
Well, a personality desires the immediate realization of its will. The executive branch is structured to act quickly.
Right. The president gives an order, and the military or the bureaucracy just moves.
Exactly. But the legislative system requires coalition building, it requires procedural hurdles, and it requires time.
So the speeds are just completely mismatched.
Precisely. When Jonah Goldberg points out the controversies surrounding the president, what he's really observing is the excess energy generated by this clash of operating speeds.
Oh, interesting. So the controversies are like exhausts?
Yes. The controversies, the public statements, the pressure campaigns, those are the sparks flying off the gears when the executive will is applied too forcefully.
Applied against a system that absolutely refuses to spin in that same speed.
Exactly. The system is demanding 60 votes and bipartisan compromise, while the personality is demanding immediate loyalty.
And those two mechanics are just totally incompatible.
They are.
And while that friction is stalling the SAVE Act, we actually have another highly specific data point from the Senate today regarding immigration.
And this touches on the power of the purse, right?
Yes, exactly. Senate Republicans are moving forward on a bill to fund ICE enforcement, immigration, and customs enforcement.
Okay, standard procedure so far.
But here is the mechanism I want to focus on. They are attempting to fund it specifically through the end of Trump's term.
Ah. Not a standard one-year fiscal appropriation.
Right, not a standard appropriation, not a continuous resolution, but tied directly to the calendar of the executive personality.
This is a textbook example of trying to use a system to immortalize a personality.
Break that down for us. Why is that immortalizing it?
Let's look at the mechanics of federal budgeting. Usually, funding is cyclical, right?
Right, it forces the executive to repeatedly come back to the legislative branch to ask for money.
Which ensures the system maintains leverage over the personality. But why tie the funding exactly to the end of a presidential term?
Because electoral politics are inherently volatile.
Exactly. The system of elections guarantees that power is temporary.
So by using the legislative system, the appropriation of funds, they are locking in a mandate.
Yes, a mandate that perfectly aligns with this specific personality's time in office. They're trying to insulate that policy from future democratic volatility.
Wow. So it is an attempt to make the executive's will rigid and systemic.
Protecting it from whoever might hold that office next, exactly.
But wait, isn't that just standard political strategy? Like when Democrats are in power, they try to lock in green energy subsidies.
Sure they do.
And when Republicans are in power, they try to lock in border funding. Why is tying funding to a calendar date a systemic capture rather than just, a party playing hardball with the budget?
Help me understand the difference you're seeing.
Well, I'm asking you, what is the difference?
Ah, right. The difference is the architectural intent.
The architectural intent. Okay, explain that.
Hardball politics is fighting over the amount of money in a cyclical budget. Systemic capture is attempting to disable the cycle entirely.
By tying it to the term limit itself.
Exactly. When you explicitly tie the funding to the lifespan of a single administration, you are telling the legislative branch, do not revisit this issue until this specific leader is gone.
Oh, I see. You are bypassing the traditional continuous oversight mechanism of the House and Senate.
Right, and replacing it with a personalized timeline. You are subjugating the institutional calendar to the personal calendar.
Okay, so think of the government like treating a complex illness. I want to try a new analogy here for everyone listening.
Let's hear it.
The executive personality is a doctor who wants to cure the patient instantly, so they prescribe an incredibly aggressive experimental treatment. They want forward momentum right now.
Right. They want immediate results.
But the Senate, structurally, is the FDA approval process. It demands clinical trials, peer review, and slow, agonizing data collection.
That's a great way to look at it.
So if the executive's aggressive treatment, the legislative agenda, doesn't survive the clinical trials, all you get is a massive public fight over the medicine.
Which is the political controversy Jonah Goldberg is pointing out.
Exactly. It looks dramatic, it sounds deafening, but the patient doesn't actually receive the drug. The SAVE Act fails.
Right.
So for you listening, the question becomes, is this a failure of the government to act? Or is this the government doing exactly what the Constitution intended it to do?
From the perspective of the 1787 framework, it is a resounding success of the system.
A success, even though nothing got done.
Yes, because the system was built to absorb the shock of an aggressive executive without allowing the laws to careen out of control.
So the failure of the SAVE Act isn't a glitch.
No. It is the friction working as designed to prevent a concentration of power that hasn't achieved broad systemic consensus.
Okay, so we just saw how the legislative system can passively fail to advance executive priorities through sheer grinding friction.
Just by slowing things down.
Right, but what happens when the system actively, affirmatively pushes back against executive authority?
That is when the theoretical tension of the Constitution becomes very real, very physical political conflict.
I mean, we have an example of that in today's briefing.
The Fitzpatrick story, right?
Yes, the story of Representative Brian Fitzpatrick, a Republican from Pennsylvania, choosing to cross the aisle.
He joined Democrats and 3 other Republicans in a vote specifically designed to end the war in Iran.
Right. He is actively voting to curb the military actions of his own party's executive leader.
Which is a massive move mechanically.
It is. And alongside that, we have NPR's Scott Detrow interviewing Ann Applebaum from The Atlantic discussing a very rare phenomenon.
The Trump administration actually backing down from some of its actions.
Exactly. They are discussing what this implies for the broader concerns people have about Democratic backsliding.
What's fascinating here is how deeply this touches the most sensitive nerve in the U.S. Constitution, war powers.
Because war is the ultimate executive action, right?
Exactly. If you want to test the strength of the 1787 system, you look at how it handles the military.
Let's look at the mechanics of the War Powers Resolution of 1973.
Okay, so the framers gave the role of commander-in-chief to one personality, the president, because warfare requires decisive, unified action.
Right. You can't have 535 generals running a battlefield. It would be chaos.
Pure chaos. But they gave the power to declare war and the power to fund it to the Congress, the system.
The 1973 resolution explicitly states that the president can deploy troops, but must get congressional approval within 60 days or withdraw them.
It is the ultimate systemic leash on the ultimate executive power.
I have to push back a bit here, though.
Sure.
We are talking about one representative, Brian Fitzpatrick, and a handful of others. Are we putting too much weight on one guy's vote?
You mean compared to the entire executive branch?
Yeah. The executive branch has a massive military apparatus. Does a single floor vote actually threaten the personality's power?
Mechanically, yes, it threatens the legitimacy of the power.
How so?
Remember, the executive derives its authority from the perception of a unified mandate.
Okay, so everyone needs to seem like they're on the same page.
Exactly. When a lawmaker from the president's own party crosses the aisle to invoke the War Powers Act, it shatters that unified front.
Oh, I see.
And this ties directly into Ann Applebaum's point about democratic backsliding.
Because backsliding isn't just a buzzword, right?
Right. It refers to the mechanical erosion of democratic norms. When an executive starts bypassing legislatures, stacking courts, ruling by decree.
So when a highly personality-driven administration actually yields to a congressional vote?
We have to ask a strategic question. Are they genuinely submitting to the permanent authority of the system, recognizing the constitutional boundaries?
Or is this merely a tactical, temporary retreat?
Exactly. In military strategy, a tactical retreat is when you pull back your forces to avoid a losing battle.
Waiting for a moment when the enemy is weaker or distracted?
Right, so if the executive is just executing a tactical retreat, the system hasn't won.
It has just survived another day.
Precisely.
Here's where it gets really interesting, and I want to zoom in on the psychology of that floor vote.
The psychology of Fitzpatrick.
Yes. For anyone listening, consider this. When lawmakers break rank from their political party, and by extension, the executive personality leading that party, they are making a very conscious, highly risky choice.
It's political suicide in some cases.
Right. They are choosing the institution of Congress over the personality of the party leader.
They are saying, my role in this system of checks and balances supersedes my loyalty to this individual, even if it costs me my next primary election.
So how vital is that specific individual behavior to maintaining that 800-year lineage we trace back to the Magna Carta?
It is the absolute lifeblood of it. I mean, Magna Carta wasn't just a piece of parchment.
It required actual people to enforce it.
It required actual human barons willing to stand in front of King John, risk being executed for treason, and demand he submit to the law.
Because a system cannot enforce itself.
Exactly. A constitution is just ink on paper, unless the human beings occupying the institutions decide that the institution is more important than their personal political alliances.
So when a representative like Fitzpatrick votes against his party's executive to reclaim war powers, he is temporarily animating the ghost of the 1787 framework.
He is proving that the system still has teeth, but only because an individual chose to bite.
Wow. Okay, so we just saw how the domestic legislature can constrain a president. But this tug of war doesn't happen in a vacuum, does it?
No, it is deeply affected by what happens outside our borders.
So how do foreign systems of power actually influence American domestic power?
Well, the instrument of power framework doesn't stop at the water's edge.
Meaning international relations are basically just overlapping systems of power.
Exactly. Treaties, international law, trade agreements, these are all macro systems.
Right, because today we also have the news that Israel and Lebanon have agreed to a ceasefire.
A major development.
It is. And the intelligence assessment in the briefing is that this specific regional ceasefire could significantly aid in ending the wider war in Iran.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, we see exactly how a global system empowers or constrains a domestic personality.
Because a ceasefire isn't just a pause in shooting.
Mechanically, it is a legally binding international system that fundamentally alters the battlefield.
Okay, so let's say a president might want to project personality-driven power through continued military conflict in the Middle East.
They might argue to the American public that the emergency requires unchecked executive authority.
But when foreign actors who are completely outside the president's direct control create a diplomatic system like a ceasefire,
It changes the entire geopolitical math.
it changes the leverage.
Exactly. It alters the domestic leverage. Going back to Representative Fitzpatrick, a foreign ceasefire provides the logical, systemic cover a domestic lawmaker needs to break with the executive.
Oh, because the facts on the ground changed.
Right. If Israel and Lebanon are de-escalating through international systems, the American executive personality suddenly loses the justification of an immediate regional crisis to demand unchecked war powers from Congress.
So the foreign system effectively reinforces the domestic system.
It hands the legislative branch the factual evidence they need to pull the leash a little tighter on the commander-in-chief.
It is fascinating to realize that a signature on a document in Beirut or Jerusalem can directly empower a legislator in Washington, D.C. to vote against the White House.
It's all connected mechanically.
But let's bring our focus from foreign policy back to the homeland,
Okay.
because where foreign policy restricts a president, domestic policy is where the executive holds the most direct bureaucratic leverage.
Yes, that's where their power is most visible.
Right. Because power doesn't just want to fight wars, it wants to shape the very fabric of the nation itself, both the demographics of its population and the physical reality of its streets.
And this is where we see the mechanics of power become intensely personal for the citizens living underneath it.
Right. When the executive leverages the domestic bureaucracy, the friction is felt immediately by the public.
So what are we looking at in the briefings for this?
Well, we have two deeply consequential stories about how the executive is utilizing domestic force and shaping
Let's
demographics.
start with demographics.
Okay. First, the administration's policy of stopping general refugee admission entirely while simultaneously creating a specific carved-out program solely for white South Africans.
That's a highly targeted policy.
It is. And we have Secretary of State Marco Rubio testifying to lawmakers this week, explicitly defending this policy by stating that this specific demographic assimilates more easily.
This raises an important question. How does a government define, measure, and systematize a word like assimilation?
It doesn't seem like something you can put on a spreadsheet.
Because you logically can't.
Yeah.
Let's look at the actual mechanics of the United States refugee admission process.
Okay, how does it normally work?
Traditionally, it is a highly system-based mechanism governed by international law and the Refugee Act of 1980.
So it relies on objective, codified criteria.
Yes. To be admitted, a person must prove a well-founded fear of persecution based on race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion.
Those are legal definitions.
Right? They are processed through rigorous bureaucratic channels, interviews, and intelligence vetting.
But when you bypass those objective threat assessments and shift the standard to a subjective metric like ease of assimilation,
You are watching a systemic process be completely captured by a personality's worldview.
explain that capture. How does the word assimilation bypass the system?
Well, think about it. Assimilation is an aesthetic judgment.
It's not a legal test.
Exactly. It cannot be quantified by a lawyer. It is the executive personality deciding what the cultural fabric of the nation should look like.
Rather than allowing the legal system to process who is factually entitled to safe harbor under the law.
Right. When Secretary Rubio argues for a carve-out based on assimilation, he is arguing for the concentration of demographic power into a personal political preference.
It replaces the blindness of the justice system with the specific vision of the executive.
That's exactly what's happening mechanically.
And we see a strikingly similar dynamic play out with physical force in Washington, D.C.
The National Guard story.
Yes, we have a new study today regarding the National Guard. Let me lay out the facts for everyone listening.
Okay, lay it out.
The National Guard has been deployed in D.C. since last August as part of a massive federal task force aimed at fighting local crime.
Which is an unusual use of the Guard, to start
All
with.
right. The data is in, and the study shows unequivocally that the presence of the National Guard has had no effect whatsoever on violent crime in the city. None.
The data is completely flat.
Exactly. Yet, despite this systemic empirical data, the administration's directive is that their numbers are set to double in the coming weeks.
Now let's analyze the mechanics of the tools being used here. You have the use of military power.
Which is a massive, rigid federal system designed for national defense, right?
Right, and large-scale crisis management.
Yeah.
And you are deploying it to solve a municipal issue, which is local violent crime.
And violent crime is usually driven by highly localized socioeconomic factors.
Exactly. So it's a total mismatch of tools.
I want to use an analogy here to get to the core of why this fails mechanically. Treating complex socioeconomic crime with a military deployment is like treating a deep bacterial infection with a topical painkiller cream.
Okay, I follow you.
The painkiller makes the surface look better, it numbs the immediate area and gives the illusion that medicine is working, but it does absolutely nothing to fight the internal infection.
Right, the bacteria just keeps multiplying.
Exactly. The crime, like the bacteria, continues to spread beneath the surface. And the executive's response to the study showing the infection is spreading isn't to prescribe antibiotics.
The response is to double the amount of painkiller cream.
Exactly. So I pose this to you listening. Are we witnessing a failure of the system to manage crime, or the failure of a personality to understand the correct system to use?
That is the crux of it. Why double the troops if the systemic, empirical data proves it is ineffective?
Why do it?
Because for a personality-driven administration, The image of power is often vastly more valuable than the systemic efficacy of the policy.
So it's about optics.
Completely. The sight of National Guard uniforms, Humvees, and military checkpoints on the streets of the capital projects a narrative of strength, order, and executive control.
The personality needs the aesthetic of action to feed its political base.
Right. The fact that the federal system fails to achieve the municipal goal of lowering crime is secondary to the fact that the personality gets to be seen wielding the ultimate instrument of power, the military.
It's the performance of power overriding the mechanics of governance.
Exactly. It's a show.
And when formal systems like the courts or the data-driven studies we just mentioned or the slow-moving Congress fail to immediately check that performance, power often clashes directly with a totally different kind of system.
The unofficial system.
Exactly, the free press.
The press occupies a totally unique space in our 800-year framework.
Because it wasn't in the Magna Carta.
No, it wasn't. And while it is protected by the First Amendment of the Constitution, it holds no actual governmental authority.
It cannot subpoena you, it cannot arrest you, and it cannot tax you.
Exactly. It's completely outside the formal gears.
Right. And today we have two stark examples of how power interacts with that unofficial check.
The first one is the president's exchange with the CNN reporter.
Yes, we have an exchange where President Trump told CNN's Caitlin Collins that she had hatred in her eyes.
Which is a very personal attack.
It is, and this isn't an isolated incident. The briefing contextualizes this within a much broader pattern of highly contentious, deeply personal relationships with the press.
Particularly focusing on women reporters who challenge him directly on the facts.
Right. And then, on the other end of the political power spectrum, we have the story of former Congressman George Santos.
This is a wild story mechanically.
It really is. After NPR reported on federal investigations into his bets on the prediction market site Kalshi, Santos didn't issue a press release or file a lawsuit.
He didn't use any institutional tools.
No, he made a direct, violent threat to the NPR reporter who broke the story, and then subsequently lied about making the threat.
These interactions reveal the absolute rawest, most unvarnished form of the system versus personality conflict.
Let's look at the Caitlin Collins exchange first.
Okay. What is the mechanical role of a reporter in a press briefing?
Well, when a reporter asks a question, they are acting as a proxy for the public system of factual accountability.
Exactly. They are demanding data, rationale, and policy specifics.
So when the executive responds by telling her she has hatred in her eyes,
He is entirely bypassing a systemic debate on the facts of the policy. He is personalizing the conflict.
he is changing the battlefield entirely. Like, if he debates the policy, he has to operate within the system of facts.
Which is restrictive.
Right. But if he attacks her emotions, he dominates the personality clash.
Precisely. By attacking the individual's supposed emotional state, the personality attempts to delegitimize the systemic function of the press.
Because if she's just a hater, then the executive doesn't have to answer the question on a factual, systemic level.
And the audience is trained to dismiss the inquiry entirely.
And we can link this dynamic directly to George Santos, which shows us exactly what happens when institutional power evaporates.
Yes, the Santos situation is the perfect foil for this.
Let me set the table on the Santos story, because the mechanics of the Kalshi market are important here for you listening.
Yeah, explain what Kalshi is.
So, Kalshi is a federally regulated financial exchange. It is a prediction market where users can buy yes or no contracts on real-world events, including political outcomes.
And it operates under the oversight of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, the CFTC.
Right. So the reason the federal government and NPR care about a former congressman betting on this site is the implication of insider trading or market manipulation.
Because if you have non-public political connections and you are betting on political outcomes, that triggers massive systemic alarms.
Exactly.
And that context is vital because it shows how Santos is completely cornered.
He's trapped.
George Santos is a former congressman. He has lost his institutional power.
When he was in Congress, if he was challenged by a reporter, he could use the systems of his office.
Right. He had lawyers, press secretaries, committee assignments, and the literal architecture of the Capitol to shield himself.
He could issue subpoenas to deflect attention.
But stripped of that institutional armor and facing the exposing light of a press investigation into his financial bets, he has no system left to protect him.
So what does he do when the system abandons him?
He resorts to raw, ungoverned, personality-driven power.
Violent threats.
Yes. It is power devolved to its most primitive fight-or-flight state.
I want to point something out to everyone listening and really challenge the premise as how we view the press.
Okay.
The press has no physical power. Like we said, it has no military, no National Guard to deploy to D.C. It cannot pass laws or write budget.
Its only instrument of power is exposure.
It simply turns the lights on.
Yeah.
So when an executive personality or a former official systematically attacks the press, does it actually weaken the press?
Or does it, perversely, validate the press's power in the eyes of the public?
Right. Does the ferocity of the violent threat from Santos or the personal insult from the president reveal the deep fear that the personality has of simply being exposed to the system of public opinion?
It is the great paradox of the press. The more energy a personality expends attacking a reporter, the more they validate the premise that the reporter's exposure is a genuine threat to their concentration of power.
A king does not scream at a peasant unless the peasant somehow holds the key to the castle.
Exactly. The violent reaction is the ultimate proof that the unofficial system is working.
That's a profound way to look at it. We've explored how a personality fights the system while in office. We just talked about how they fight the press.
But eventually, whether you are a king, a congressman, or a president, the system dictates that your time is up.
Right. All personalities eventually leave office. They are mortal. The system is designed to be immortal.
So how does a personality ensure their power doesn't just vanish with them when they hand over the keys?
They attempt the ultimate political metamorphosis.
They try to turn themselves into a system.
Which brings us to our final briefing.
The Obama Center, right?
Yes. Later this month, the Obama Presidential Center is officially opening in Chicago, and NPR has provided a visual preview of the inside of this massive, multi-million-dollar complex.
If we look at the concept of the Presidential Library or Center through our historical framework, it is a brilliant, entirely modern invention of legacy preservation.
Let's look at the mechanics of it.
Under the Presidential Records Act, the documents of an administration actually belong to the public system, the National Archives.
Right. They aren't personal property.
But the presentation of those documents, the narrative surrounding them, is funded and curated by private foundations raised by the former executive.
So while in office, the governing personality fights the system.
They fight the friction of the Senate, they fight the exposure of the press, they fight the courts.
But once they leave, they use the vast resources they've accumulated to build a physical institution.
They transition from wielding power to narrating power.
So what does this all mean? Let's take it all the way back to the start of our deep dive. Back to 1215.
Back to Runnymede.
Yes. The kings of the Magna Carta era built massive stone castles with moats and parapets to project their power and intimidate their subjects into compliance.
And modern presidents build sleek, architecturally stunning centers and libraries in major American cities.
The tools have changed, but the underlying impulse is exactly the same.
It is the final stage of the power life cycle.
You acquire the power, you wield it against the friction of the system, and when the clock runs out and your time is up, you build a monument to tell all future generations exactly how they should remember you wielding that power.
You build a physical system to house your personality forever.
It is the final, desperate attempt to defeat the mortality of the personality.
If you can control the historical memory of your power, you never truly give it up.
We have covered incredible ground today.
We really have.
We've taken you on a journey through the absolute mechanics of American governance. We watched executive will try and fail to force its way through the intentional geographic friction of the Senate with the SAVE Act.
And we watched lawmakers like Brian Fitzpatrick utilize the mechanics of a foreign ceasefire to pull the emergency brake on foreign wars.
Proving the system still functions if individuals choose to risk their careers to use it.
Exactly.
We witnessed the deployment of raw military force at home with the National Guard in D.C., exposing the clash between the aesthetic of power and systemic efficacy.
We examined the attempt to shape demographics through subjective, personality-driven measures of assimilation.
We saw the raw clash between personality and the press with George Santos and Caitlin Collins.
And finally, we look at how power builds its own monuments to cheat time with the Obama Center.
Why does parsing these daily briefings through this specific lens matter to you?
That's the real question.
Because when you understand whether a personality or a system is driving the news on any given day, you stop reacting to the chaotic, emotional headlines.
You stop being tossed around by the partisan noise.
You start seeing the underlying gears turning. You start seeing the mechanics of history unfolding in real time.
And as we close, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over regarding this eternal struggle between system and personality.
What's that?
We celebrate when a system successfully restrains a personality, like the Senate blocking an overreaching agenda, or the press exposing a lie.
Because it feels like the system works.
Right, but we have to ask, does that victory actually make the system stronger?
Or what?
Or, by pushing against the boundaries and failing, does the personality just teach the next generation of ambitious personalities exactly where the system's weak points are for next time?
Wow. That is something to think about. Power understood, power governed, power preserved.